Hello, welcome to the land of Kakiak. My name is Laurel. We are continuing our reading of the Eclectic Manual of Methods. We are still in the reading section, chapter 4, titled McGuffey's First Reader. If the class has studied the revised eclectic primer before taking up this book, the teacher will find the way clear for rapid advancement. The first 10 lessons of the reader contain only 3 new words: fed, left, and pan, not already studied in the primer. In the next 17 lessons, about half the words are new, among them a dozen words of 2 syllables. These latter should not offer any particular difficulty, as a few words of this kind have been met with in the primer. From this point forward, the proportion of new words and 2-syllable words rapidly increases, affording an abundance of material for advanced work. Attention will be called to any special difficulties that present themselves under the directions for each particular lesson demanding notice. As before stated, the detailed instructions for the first lessons of the first reader are in accordance with the phonic method. If a teacher prefers to use the combined method, it is presumed that the instructions for the first lessons in the primer will be a sufficient guide for work in the readers. On the other hand, teachers using the phonic method will be able, it is thought, to follow that method very easily in the primer after consulting the following instructions for the first reader. As it cannot be assumed that all teachers will use both primer and first reader, the detailed instructions for the latter have been made as full as though the primer had not been used. This fact will explain a few repetitions. If the primer is not to be used, it will be well to begin work with a few preliminary oral lessons, which may be conducted as shown in the following pages. If the teacher intends to use both the primer and the first reader, and to teach by the phonic method, lessons corresponding to the following should precede the primer, and these lessons should be omitted. Recognition of sounds. After the attention of the children has been gained, the teacher taps the table with the pencil and explains to the children that what they hear is called a sound. After repeating the same sound several times, the teacher tells the children to listen, and he will make another sound. This may be done by tapping a bell or piece of metal, and the children are led to distinguish between the 2 different sounds. After a little practice of this nature, tell the children that the words which they hear and understand are sounds. Ask them whether if they heard 2 sounds, one made by a dog and one by a bird, they could tell from the sounds which one was made by the bird and which by the dog. Tell them you are now going to try them and see whether, without looking, they can tell you the different sounds you make. The children may shut their eyes or stand with their backs to the teacher, or the teacher may make the different sound behind the desk, asking after each, "What sound did you hear?" Answers like the following may be given. "The sound I heard was a tap on a bell. The sound I heard was a tap on a book. I heard a talk sound. I heard a sing sound." It will be found interesting and profitable to continue this practice in distinguishing sounds in connection with the regular lessons, till the children catch the sounds readily and accurately. Each succeeding lesson should be a more severe test of the children's abilities than the one preceding. The sound represented by short A. In commencing to teach the elementary sounds in lesson 1 of the first reader, select one of the short vowels. If you select A, you should follow it by and If you select A, you should follow it by G and D. That is, finish the word with which you begin before taking up the sounds of another. Begin by asking the class to tell you some sounds they can make with their mouths. We can sing, we can talk, we can whistle, we cry sometimes. These may be some of the answers of the children. The teacher says, "Now listen to me. I will make a sound." He gives the sound "ah." The children repeat it with the teacher several times. Care must be taken that the sound is made short and pure. Have the children give the sound alone. The boys alone, the girls alone, the children in the front row, anyone who will receive a volunteer, and finally, each child should be required to give the sound alone. The teacher here explains that sounds can be heard but not seen, but marks may be made to stand for sounds. The teacher turns to the blackboard and between a headline and a baseline writes the letter A. He explains to the children that when they see this, they are to make the sound just learned. The children are shown next how to make the character, and the teacher asks, "How many will try to make this on their slates?" Write the following copy carefully on the board and have the children at their seats imitate it on their slate as well as they can. For those who are listening, it's just a line of short A's with the, it's a lowercase a with the breve over it. After practicing for a time, the children should exhibit their slates to the teacher, who should point out the faults carefully and delicately, and should get farther explanation about writing, illustrating on the blackboard. See page 13. The word ran. Teach the sound of n as you taught that of ah. Contrast the two sounds repeatedly and see that the children can distinguish them readily and can produce them. Write the character N on the board as a copy for a writing lesson. It may be practiced a part at a time if thought desirable as follows. So they start with, and then they break down the different parts of the letter N for practice, how to write it. When the children can give the sound and write the characters A and N, teach them to sound and write their combination an. Teach the sound and form of and then the word ran as a whole. The word dog. Teach the word dog in the same gradual way that you taught ran and in the same order, namely. The sound of ah, its written character, the sound of g, its written character, the sound of combination og, the written combination og, the sound of d, its written character, the sounds of dog as a whole, the written word as a whole. The word the. Do not attempt to teach the elementary sounds composing the, as the obscure sound of E is too difficult to introduce at this point. It is absolutely necessary to introduce the articles a, an, and the early in the course on account of their constant occurrence in even the simplest sentences. They should be taught, as before suggested, only in combination with the words which follow. After the word dog has been learned, teach by sound the phrase the dog. Be very careful not to accent the or to give the E its long sound, thus the dog, but pronounce the words naturally as you would in enumerating, the dog, the cat, the rat, etc., giving the E its obscure sound and letting the accent fall on dog. This is quite an important point, as the should never be pronounced in combination in any other way than that here laid down. And if the children are allowed to hear or to pronounce the words the dog, etc., they will fall into the habit of drawling, which will be very difficult to overcome. Write the combination on the board with and without the capital T, thus, the dog, the dog. Pronounce the phrase and have the children pronounce it after you correctly, both in concert and individually as you point it out on the board. Do not say anything about capitals and small letters at this point. Simply say that the, capitalized the, and lowercase the mean the same thing, and drill the children until they can recognize each by itself and in combination with the word dog. Have the pupils write the phrases on their slates. Finally, teach the complete sentence. The dog ran. Length of lessons. It is impossible to make any arbitrary division of these preliminary lessons. Each teacher must decide for himself as to the length of the lessons as circumstances dictate. But the caution may be repeated not to attempt too much in one lesson. At the same time, introduce enough new matter to keep the children interested. Each lesson in this preliminary work should commence with a review of all that has already been learned. Lesson 1. The transition from script to the printed forms usually presents but little difficulty to children. After 2 or 3 lessons, they read one form as readily as the other. When the written characters of the several elementary sounds and words of the first lesson are well learned by the children, write the complete list on the board, and under each written character and word, make its corresponding printed form, being careful to insert all the diacritical marks in both forms. Drill the class on these printed forms at first in connection with the written forms, then rub out the written forms and drill on the printed forms alone. When the printed forms of all the characters and words can be pointed out as soon as sounded, and sounded as soon as pointed out, have the children open their books and read lesson 1. Correct drawling and hesitation at once. Do not let a child say, the dog. The dog ran. See the children say, the dog ran, promptly and naturally, as they would in speaking. The moment the combinations are presented to the eye, it is essential to enforce this point from the beginning. There is a strong tendency in some localites to pronounce the word dog as though it were spelled dog. The words frog, doll, log, god, etc. are similarly mispronounced by many persons. This is not the proper sound of ah, and the same persons would never think of pronouncing the word fog, got, odd, or hod in the same way. Insist on the proper sound of ah from the beginning and wherever it occurs. Lesson 2. In this lesson, we have 4 new words and 5 new elementary sounds. Teach the new elementary sounds, words, and combinations as in Lesson 1. The vocabularies invariably contain all new words and sounds, so they will not have to be sought for in the text. Illustrate the use of the word on by placing your book, pencil, etc. on the desk, on a chair, on your hand, etc., and ask in each case where it is. When the class understands the force and meaning of the word, teach its written form in the usual manner. When satisfied that all can recognize the printed new characters and words at sight, have the lesson read from the book. Explain the interrogation point. Tell the children that when they see that mark, they may always know that a question is asked. Have them read the question, "Is the cat on the mat?" giving the proper rising inflection on the last word. Then have them read the answer with the downward inflection at the close and with the proper emphasis on is. The proper expression in this case and in similar ones can usually be elicited from the children by a few well-put questions, which teachers call thought study, as, what is on the mat? Where is the cat? Is the cat under the mat? Do not allow a child to read the question and answer in the painfully monotonous way so often heard in primary classes, with pauses between each word and with the rising inflection on each word, but the last as follows. Is the cat on the mat? The cat is on the mat. Insist on having both question and answer read in the same natural tones that the child would employ in speaking. If the class fail to read the question properly, have the books closed and select some people to ask the question and another to answer it. Do not show them how to do it and have them imitate you. That is simply parrot work, words without thought, and the very worst of all bad methods. Tell one pupil to ask another if the cat is on the mat, just as though he really wished to know, and tell the second pupil to answer not by yes or no, but in full either that the cat is or is not on the mat. When this has been done properly, have the entire class ask and answer the question, and then have it read in precisely the same tones. Constant attention to just such points as this lead the children to think for themselves, and they soon become intelligent and agreeable readers. If spelling be taught orally at all, it should be confined in primary classes to the words of the reading lessons and should invariably be combined with written exercises on the same words. See page 22. Some teachers prefer to use oral as well as written exercises in spelling, claiming that the former assists some children to remember the words they have learned. It also assists in articulation by requiring the child to name the letter and then give it its proper sound. Word building, as suggested on page 59, should be begun as soon as possible, and after some progress has been made, it will be found interesting to the children to write the thoughts in a lesson, sentence by sentence in their own words. This is a capital exercise, as it soon teaches a child to use this vocabulary properly and to discover the expression through the thought. When the class is far enough advanced to have the reading lesson assigned for study before recitation, call attention to such points as will be likely to excite curiosity and interest. It is unwise to read the lesson in full as is sometimes done. It is unwise to read the lesson in full as is sometimes done. The children should be left to do as much work as possible for themselves. It is hardly necessary to say, perhaps, there should be a daily review of each lesson of the preceding day. The detailed instructions for lessons 1 and 2 are presumed to be a sufficient guide for succeeding lessons. In the latter, therefore, attention is called merely to those points which demand particular instruction. The general remarks, chapter 5, apply equally to primer and first reader, and usually to the phonic as well as the combined method. They should be read before commencing work on the first reading lesson, whether it be in the primer or the first reader. Lessons 3, 4, and 5. Nothing demanding special attention is met with in lessons 3 and 4. In lesson 5, there is a new sound of C and a new sound of S. Call the attention of the children to the short sound of E as in pen, lesson 3, and contrast it with the long sound of E as in C. Compare the sounds of S and C with the sound of S and is, lesson 2. Here also we have two words containing silent letters, an and C. These should be explained in very simple language. Tell the children that an is pronounced just as though it were printed an, and C just as though it were printed se. Illustrate by writing the two words on the board as they are properly spelled, and then cancel the silent letters by drawing a line through them. The digraph CH should be taught as one element, and we may give this instruction generally in regard to all digraphs. Also, wherever a new sound of a letter is met with, whether vowel or consonant, it should invariably be contrasted with the sound or sounds of the letter previously studied, and in making these comparisons, the letters with their diacritical marks should always be written or printed on the board. In this way, the children will soon become familiar with the force of the diacritical marks. The exclamation point is first met in Lesson 5. Call attention to it and teach its meaning. Lesson 6. There are 3 digraphs in the vocabulary. Double O long has its peculiar sound, differing from simple O long. It will not do to treat it, therefore, as we did double E in Lesson 5, where practically one E is silent and the other has the identical sound of long E. For the combination OW, here and in all other cases, see Suggestions to Teachers, page 2 of McGuffey's Revised First Eclectic Reader. Lesson 7. The silent G in eggs affords opportunity to review the instructions on this point and to test the understanding of the class. Lesson 9. This is the first review lesson and should receive careful attention. All the words employed have been given in preceding vocabularies. This is true of every review lesson in the book. Hesitation, therefore, on the part of any considerable number of the class on a review indicates a fault somewhere. Either work has been pushed too rapidly or some one lesson perhaps has not been thoroughly mastered. A little careful investigation will generally reveal the trouble, and the defect can be remedied and should be before proceeding with the next series of lessons. Lesson 11. By the time the class has finished this lesson, they have met with all the small letters of the alphabet except Q and Z. As these 2 letters are but little used and are introduced very much later in the book, it is suggested that at this point a thorough review be given of the alphabets, large and small, printed and script, excepting these 2 letters. If the teacher so prefers, these 2 letters may also be taught in connection with this lesson, which is quite a simple one. If the class has previously studied the primer, of course, this review of the alphabets will be unnecessary. Lesson 12. Kitty is the first word of 2 syllables in this book. The accent should be explained and vocal illustration given. The combination NG is rather difficult and needs especial care. Lesson 8. Explain in simple language the use of the apostrophe S as denoting possession. Drill carefully on N. Lessons 17 and 18. The lessons are intended as a special drills on script. They should be written by each member of the class as well as read. This instruction applies to similar lessons throughout the book. Lesson 19. The sound of A is the most commonly mispronounced of all the A sounds, and the error is quite common, even among the best educated classes. Many who know better give it the wrong sound through the force of habit and association and the lack of early training. The word is neither pronounced grass nor gross, but grass. It should be well to make a list of the words containing the sound of A as the class meets them and give a special drill on it from time to time. Lesson 21. Here we have a very unusual substitution of for I in the word pretty, which is frequently mispronounced pretty in place of pretty. Lesson 29. Teach in simple language the use of the hyphen at the end of the first line of this lesson. Lesson 25. The combination AI is not recognized as a substitute for E. The word said is therefore respelled in order to give its proper pronunciation. Teach the use of the quotation marks which are here introduced. Lesson 28. The word can't presents 2 difficulties. its pronunciation, and the mark of abbreviation. While the word can has the short A, it will be noticed that in can't, the A is pronounced like A in farm. The proper pronunciation should be insisted upon as often as the word is used by people in the teacher's presence. To explain the abbreviation mark, write the words can, not on the board, then rub out the no of not and write the apostrophe in their place, explaining that it stands for the omitted letters. Test the class in the use of the hyphen in the line next to the last in the lesson. Lesson 30. The word won't is a peculiar contraction of will not or will not. Used colloquially in New England, it is sometimes pronounced as though spelled want. A full explanation of the derivation of the word will probably not be understood by young children. It will be sufficient to explain that the apostrophe stands for an omitted O in the word not, which helps form the compound. It will be noticed that the quotation marks in this lesson are used to indicate a continued conversation, differing from previous cases in the omission of the person relating the conversation. See that the children understand that two persons are speaking and when one ceases and the other begins. Lesson 31. The past tenses, called and jumped, are the first words of their form that are presented. They may be mistaken for words of two syllables. Teach that the E in both words is silent. Attention should be called to a new use of the capital letter at the beginning of a quotation as in paragraph 7. Kate said, "Good old Ponto." Heretofore, the capital has been used only as the initial letter of a proper name and of the first word of a sentence. Lesson 32. The word says is respelled since AY is not recognized as a substitute for E. The letter Z is first represented in this respelling. If it causes any difficulties, substitute S for Z, thus says. Lesson 35. Test the knowledge of the class on the use of the apostrophe in I've. If no one can tell for what letter it stands for, write the words I have on the board and have some people erase the proper letters without prompting. Assign compositions in which the children are to use the abbreviations I've, I'll, I'd, I'm, etc. Lesson 36. This lesson presents another word requiring respelling in order to show its proper pronunciation. Ben is often improperly pronounced Ben. Lesson 37. The word one needs particular attention. The main difficulty with these words of arbitrary pronunciation is in the spelling. But if the daily writing exercises are conducted in the manner we had advised, they soon become fixed in the memory and present little trouble. Lesson 38. Be careful about the word basket. It is generally mispronounced basket or basket. Lesson 39. In the second line of this lesson, we have the compound word easy chair. Its component parts only are given in the vocabulary. Call attention to this use of the hyphen and illustrate with other words on the blackboard. For example, market basket, derived from the preceding lesson. Lesson 40. See that the quotation marks in this lesson do not lead to confusion as to who is speaking. The mother is speaking throughout the 3rd, 4th, and 5th paragraphs. The law of punctuation requires that quotation marks should be placed at the beginning of each of these paragraphs, but at the close of the last one only. The danger is that the young child may imagine that the person speaking changes with each paragraph, and confusion naturally follows. This lesson affords a good opportunity for the teacher to test the thinking power of the children. This should be done by pertinent and searching questions. Lesson 43. In this lesson is presented an excellent drill on the different sounds of A. In the 5th line, at 8:30, we have first a and at, and then ah and half, ah and past, and e, a substitute for a in 8. Drill on this phrase and see that the 4 distinct sounds of A are clearly given. Test the class in the use of the hyphen in line 6 of page 58. The words bed and time have been given separately in lessons 24 and 29. Lesson 49. Okay, see that often is pronounced often. Both the T and the E are silent. Lesson 48. The letter Q is here introduced, completing the alphabet. Teach that Q is always followed by U. The combination has 2 sounds, that of qua, as in quiet, and that of simple k, as in peak. Lesson 49. Teach that underscored words in writing mean the same things as word printed in italics. That is, both are to be emphasized in reading. By careful thought questions on the part of the teacher, the children can be led to discover the proper word or phrases to be emphasized. Lesson 50. Laughing is rarely pronounced properly, the A being given generally as a prolonged sound of short A, as laughing, or like ah. Have it pronounced like A in father. Illustrate by pronouncing the two words a number of times alternately, dwelling a little on the A in each case to impress the sound. Lesson 55. The word again is commonly mispronounced. Poetic license is frequently taken with it, even by many of the leading poets. Nevertheless, the only proper pronunciation of the word is again. It should never be pronounced again. Lesson 56. The seasons, spring, summer, autumn, and winter, are frequently written incorrectly with a capital. The opportunity for teaching the proper method occurs in correcting the writing exercise accompanying this lesson. Do not teach or even say what the wrong form is, but if any pupil writes spring with a capital, call him up quietly and point out his error. Lesson 57. Call attention to the difference between the spelling, pronunciation, and meaning of and off. Lesson 59. Here we have the unusual occurrence of two silent letters in one syllable, making whistle a little difficult to spell. Lesson 62. Really is the first word of 3 syllables presented to the children. Lesson 63. Be careful about the word parents. It is frequently mispronounced parents. Phonic chart. The chart is presented for the purposes of drill and can be used at the discretion of the teacher as time and circumstances dictate. It is suggested that the entire school, either as a body or in separate classes, spend from 3 to 5 minutes in exercising on the elementary sounds. It will be time well spent. Okay, let's discuss. So I actually really liked this section better than the previous one on the primer. I like the methodology they're using. They're focusing more on phonics in this one. I like that. This was a long section, so I may not go over every single thing. I'll probably be thinking about this one, be rattling around in the attic for a while. I am working on my, I just put out my McGuffey primer companion notebook for the revised reader. I'm working on the next another companion notebook for the first reader. As I was reading this, I was thinking about just different scenarios for when you're starting your kids on reading. So, like, remember I said, I've shared this a billion times, but we did Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons with my younger 2 sons. And so my middle son read that whole book. He went through all 100 lessons, and then I put him into the primer. And I said it was a lot of review for him, but I didn't really mind. But I could have just started him from the Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons, which is going to go over a lot of techniques on sounding words out and things like that. And I could have put him from that into the first reader, looking back. But for my youngest son, who we only got about halfway through the 100 lessons, he does need to be in the primer. So I don't know. I just thought that might be helpful if you were using that program and you're wanting to transition into the McGuffey readers, and how your kids are, if they're pushing back against 100 Easy Lessons or something. If you are going to take them out of it early, then I would go into the primer. If you do the whole thing, I think it's okay to skip to the first reader. So yeah, of course, there's a little bit of review from the primer at the beginning. I did notice, when you're looking at the first reader, they've got their script alphabet and their manuscript. But yeah, it starts out really, really short, just like the primer does. The difference is that it speeds up much quicker than the primer. It gets longer much faster. Still has great illustrations. They're still keeping in, those script sections. Whenever I watch videos and stuff, in the science of reading and look at different resources and different people, teachers who are trained in that, I'm always like, why? I was like, why aren't you just using the McGuffey readers? Like, I just feel like they're reinventing the wheel. I'm like, it sounds like this is a decodable text, focusing on phonics. You can stay on one lesson as long as you, like, I just always feel like, I always feel like the McGuffey's have everything you need to implement the science of reading, and it's already there. Plus the added benefit of really good moral content and beautiful illustrations. And I was like, oh, that's why they don't use it, because it has moral content. Okay. And I love that it's showing them all the diacritical marks too. When I am, as I'm working on this, I am trying to take to heart the companion notebooks, what the original publishers had to say about using this, but I'm trying to apply it to a homeschool situation. And I can't help but want to apply things that more modern methods and formats that I have found helpful to my kids. So when I do show you guys the notebook that I'm working on, it won't be an exact match to this manual, just because I, eat the fish and spit out the bones, right? But what I did really like about this is the focus on the phonic method now. There is a focus on recognition of sounds. So they are starting out, now they're switching over to more of a phonic method, where they were going, I think they called it the combined method, but it's really more like a whole word method or sight word that they were doing in the primer in the previous section. So now they're trying to focus on starting off blind with the recognition of the sound. So if you could just use those in the beginning part, they are still pulling out these individual sounds. So they are starting out with just having the kids listen to the sounds and then to parrot back to them what they heard. So making sure they actually can hear the sound. I know that my William still has a hard time with the difference between and and it comes up a lot in spelling, right? Even words that sound like he'll hear them And he must get that from me, because I remember having the same problem when I was in school. I remember I thought that E and I made the same sound. We have to be really diligent in training their ear to hear the difference between the sounds, especially when they're similar sounds. So later on in the book, it does drop that. I think they've just introduced all the, phonemes pretty much. So it doesn't pull them out. It just has the words pulled out at the beginning. So that phases out in the first reader. Okay, and this part that I appreciated was that they are writing. So they said they practice those new sounds orally. Then the teacher writes a representation of the sound, right? A letter. And I don't know if you can see this on your screen, but if you're looking at the book, this is a lowercase script A, and the breve is over it, so that you're training the kids to read the diacritical marks. So if you see this sound or this symbol, right, this writing, they're supposed to pronounce it ah. And then they do slate work, where the kids do their own practice. So they write that word, that letter, whatever phoneme they are working on, with the appropriate diacritical mark. So they are really focusing here. This is more what I do in the primer. I do this from the beginning, is to teach the individual letters or digraphs or whatever and their sounds, and how to write them first before moving on to the words, and then mastering those before moving on to the whole passage. And of course, you want to be giving feedback on their writing. So here, see the readers, this is walking you through, it's not just reading, it's also writing or handwriting, right? And then they even show you how, if you want, you can break down the letters into their individual lines and curves and things, have them practice that. So they did the straight lines, and then the curve over, and then the curve under, and they put it together to make this script N. So when the children can give the sounds and write the characters A and N, teach them to sound and write their combination AN. Right? Then they're going to put it together. And then they're going to sound out and write their combination. So it does give a lot of detail about pronunciation. Okay, so of course that came up again. Whatever that A is with the dot over it, I'm trying to remember because I tried to look it up again. I went to my Logic of English. I believe I read before, I'm trying to remember, is that I believe that A pronunciation that they're talking about, like in fast and grass, it's considered a short vowel, but it's not as short as like and fat. And I think what they mean by long and short is how long, part of it is how long you say the sound, how long you articulate it. So I was like practicing really hard, but they sound so similar, fat and fast. I noticed that like when I say fast, that the sound drops down just a tiny bit lower in my throat. If I say fat, fast, I can actually physically feel it if I put my hand on my throat. If I put like two fingers, like one towards the top of my throat and one towards the bottom, and I say fat, I hear it, the more up here. And when I say fast and grass, I feel the vibration lower down in my throat. So if you really want to get technical with your kids, you can dive into that. If you're a native English speaker, it probably isn't a big deal. And they're so close that like they only have a, ah. Like most, like I've never seen this discussion of this pronunciation of the short A anywhere except in the McGuffey's. I didn't see it in ABC and All the Tricks, and I didn't see it in the Logic of English. I've never seen it in anything else. I think that they have just lumped in this pronunciation of A with the shortest A, because they're just too close to really be of meaningful discernment. Even though McGuffey's are making quite a big deal about it right here, that might be something more for, I feel like if you were new to English, if it was a second language maybe, but I am just going to call that a short A. I'm not going to make a big fuss about it personally. Okay, and then there's a bunch of things that you can point out in a bunch of different lessons, which I think is helpful, and I'll try to work that into my notebook. Yeah, I did like that. So, ED, making a verb past tense. Sometimes it sounds like t, and sometimes it sounds like d, and sometimes it sounds like id. And it just depends on what letter comes before it. But it's always when it's id, it's its own syllable, which with these ones it's not. Like kissed, kissed, kissed. Sounds like t at the end. Wailed. The child wailed. It just sounds like duh. Okay, so they have jumped. They're introducing this version of ed, right, which is a suffix for something past tense. What about the word bounded? The dog bounded towards me. Sounds like id, and it's its own. It's bound, id. This is just wailed, kissed. These are both one-syllable words, and this one is two syllables. So words like said. My friend Samantha helped me out the other day, and I was like, what is that called? Something has kind of an odd and irregular pronunciation, but they're kind of too young to really go into it. She reminded me, some people call those heart words. And I think that just because you just memorize that part by heart for that word. So like the word said, we teach the kids, what do we teach the kids? That the grapheme AI says A, but we don't pronounce this said. We pronounce it said. I think what she was saying is you put a heart around that part of it. To remember, it sounds like a short E. It sounds like said. Ed, but just for that word. I mean, you can do that technique if you want to. Or you can look more into heart words and how those are used. The one thing about the McGuffey's is that it's just that I like about it, and it's kind of different from some of the more modern teaching kind of strategies that I see, is that the passages, it just seems so natural. Like, this is just how you read. When you I know they always are like, you want a strategic, intentional, what are all the words they use? I don't know, but you know what I mean? Like more current decodable texts are like, they'll have a whole bunch of one, spelling pattern or something in them that they'll just use over and over in the text, which is fine. It's just that, and I understand why they do it. This isn't going to necessarily do that because they're just going to give you like one example word. But if you want to, it's not that hard to come up with a few extra words that also meet that pattern and work it into your lessons. So it's probably something I'm going to try to do for you in the notebook as I'm working on it, is just to introduce a little bit more of that. But it makes for better reading passages, not to be so confined to, this is all about the silent E, or this is all about the ED ending, right? It makes this for a more natural composition to read and more pleasurable. It's less constrained, and they actually get so much good content from the reading passages. But we can work that practice in so they can see that pattern more times on our own. So that's something I'll work on in the notebook for you if you're interested. But you can always do it by yourself. Like if you wanted to pull out more heart words, then you can. Yeah, again, here's that laughing, and they're saying to pronounce it laughing, like father. I'm not gonna. Nobody says laughing. It's just laughing. Like even when you look it up now, let me see. I never see this umlaut over the A. Something else that they don't mention, they did talk a little bit about ng, the ng, which is something that I'm gonna teach instead as glued sounds, ing, ang, and ong. Ing, ang, ong, because you see them so much. It's funny. So for ing, ing, it sounds like a long E, ing. For ang, it sounds like a long A, ang. And for ong, it's a short O. So there's it's not like the vowel is always short or always long or anything. It's like 3 different pronunciations of those vowels. And so we're just gonna teach these as glued sounds or welded sounds, whatever people call them, ing, ang, ong. And I teach them together usually. So back here, it's talking about the phonic chart, long vocals, short vocals, diphthongs, aspirates, subvocals, and substitutes. So I like this because it does a good job of, if you're like, what does that diacritical mark mean? If you're not sure, come back to refer to this and then just look at the example word. And if you want to see something for comparison, right, this is a more modern chart, like here in the Logic of English, she gives diacritical marks also in example words also. And you can really use whatever works best, whichever diacritical marks you prefer. Okay, and I'll link to the Logic of English for you in the description box. Okay, I'm going to start working on my notebook for this first reader because I can already tell it's going to be a lot of work. Let me know any thoughts you have or suggestions or anything. Leave them in the comments, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.